Today we have Sabrina Ratheekan with us, and she's the Director of Product Management, Enterprise Technology at Walmart Canada. We had a great conversation before because she's been speaking up, even though she is an introvert. People have said that she's too soft and all sorts of other things that have happened to her, but she still speaks up, and I'm delighted to have her on the show today. Welcome, Sabrina.
Thank you, Ivna. Thank you for having me. I am post you reaching out. I've listened to a lot of your podcast episodes and I listen to them on my way to work as well. So thank you for the great work that you're doing and thank you for having me.
Oh, that's amazing. I love hearing that. It makes me feel good. It really does. Let's start with something that we talked about last time, which is work relationships, right? You talked about the importance of connection, work relationships. So how has that led to some significant breakthroughs for you?
Yeah, I think first off, just a little bit about myself.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as an introvert, I'm a little hesitant sometimes to start connections. But in the corporate world, as I got into my career, I realized a little bit later on the importance of connection. It did take some time for me to build up confidence because if I take a step back and look back through the years, I think the first few years of my career, I was very focused on just executing, just doing the work. So I focused less on connection. And then I realized, why am I not improving? Why am I not progressing? And one of the key points in my career was connecting with people who were able to highlight that to me. At that time, I didn't even know the concept of mentorship. So I would say invisible mentors who reached out to me and were able to help me understand the importance of connections. So throughout the career, there were so many different coaches and mentors who helped me. So everything started with how I'm able to take that advice and take a proactive approach in building those connections. So it could be a coffee chat, it could be meeting your stakeholder and not just talking about transactional or work related stuff, but then really getting to know them on a personal note, right? So those are some of the things that I did in terms of building connections. And let me tell you, as an introvert or an extrovert, it's not easy to build connections. And building connection has to come from an authentic place, right? Because we don't really want to sound artificial and it's not always about gaining something. So you have to really be honest about how you're making the connection. So that was really important to me. That was a value to me.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. And it's interesting today, through other conversations with ladies, professional women and leaders, the word connection came up every single time. It's so interesting that you bring it up as well. Third time today.
Yeah,
It
it's
must
important.
be very important. And like you said, it's hard as an introvert to do that. Why is it hard? What are some of the things that were going through your mind when you started to try to build connection, or when you were a bit hesitant to build those connections with people, especially with people that might be at a higher level than you back in the day, right? Who were more senior than you? What were the fears and what was holding you back when you were starting out to build those connections?
Yeah, I think it was the awkwardness. To me, it was that. And again, the other part was I felt this was very early on, but I felt a little inadequate somewhat. Sometimes when you meet people, you don't really relate to everybody, and that commonality might not really exist. So I felt for me, it was really hard to find a commonality.
So another thing, Sabrina, that I heard from you, and I think it happens to a lot of women, and I'm definitely soft spoken as well, so I can totally relate to it, is that you've been told that you were too soft by a leader, right? So could you share a little bit more about what happened that led to that moment in which that male leader said that you were too soft, and how you felt about it?
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of us can relate to this, is that we like to make connections. We like to get to know people first, right? So for me, that is really important. Before I get into a role and I start supporting the business, it's important for me to learn about the business as well as the stakeholders. So this was during a time when I joined a role. I think it was around 3 months into the role, and I was working really hard trying to understand the business. trying to understand the technology. And I was in this meeting with a group of really tough stakeholders. And we were having a pretty intense conversation, and things were not going the way it's supposed to go from a product perspective, and they're not getting the outcomes that they need. So I was really empathizing with them. I was trying to probe a lot more, trying to understand the details around why they're upset. But I thought the meeting went well. But towards the end and towards the end later on, one of the main leaders approached me and said, "Hey, Sabrina, you're being too soft. You're not assertive enough." I was definitely taken back because in my head, I had a plan. I knew why I was doing it because I was taking my time to understand because I haven't built the credibility yet for me to start influencing the stakeholders. So this is where I realized that just because you speak eloquently or you have an assertive voice does not really mean that you're assertive. So to me, influence and being assertive is about build that trust, you build that credibility. Your stakeholders now can come to you to solve a problem. So it's a collaborative approach than one person trying to influence. So I think I kept doing what I was doing. And I really respected this individual and his feedback for sure. But at that moment, that feedback is not something that helped me. Yeah, that was a situation where I got that type of feedback and I chose to move on and stick with my plan. But a few months later, I was really able to build a trust and credibility with my partners. And I was able to now be at a position where I can negotiate, I can influence. Yeah, so that's one situation.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think it's very
Mm-hmm.
important to build that relationship, like you're saying, that connection, especially if you're in a room, like you said, with a tough situation, tough stakeholders, and you're trying to influence without top command and control methods. So it's interesting. You listen to the feedback, you evaluated how much of it made sense to you or not as well, and you decided how to move forward. But the reality is, it seems like he just did not quite understand your plan at that point. He was only seeing the beginning of your plan, and maybe he thought that was the entire plan. When in reality, you're doing that, you're empathizing, you're asking questions with a purpose.
That's true. And I think, don't get me wrong, because I think feedback is very important in your career, right? If I look back, without having really good constructive feedback, I don't think I could have ever grown. So it's really critical for you as an individual contributor or leader to get that feedback. But sometimes feedback could also be damaging. So at that moment, if I reflect, after I got that feedback, I'm talking to you about it because I remember it. But after I got that feedback, every subsequent situation I was in and I felt I'm having a challenging group of people, situation came to my head. I'm like, am I being too soft? Am I not being too assertive? So it does impact you. So I think even if you're a leader and you're providing feedback to people, just be cognizant of you see a patterned behavior and you are able to observe that and then you share the feedback, right? Yeah, so I think as the person who receives and gives the feedback, you have to be selective about accepting and giving.
Yeah, you accept and you're open to feedback, but at the end of the day, you get to decide what feedback you're going to implement and make sense for you in that moment, like you said.
Exactly.
But it did increase your awareness around your behaviors and your strategy and what you were trying to achieve and your leadership and all of that. So it did cause you to reflect on it and get even more clarity around that for yourself. So I love that. And not only you've been told that you were too soft, but you've also been told that you were too assertive, right? Or too friendly, or that you don't smile enough, or that you joke too much. And that's a lot. I've never heard someone say so many things at once that they received.
Yeah.
How was that? Because that's quite conflicting, right? Too soft and too assertive. That sounds very conflicting.
It is conflicting. And I'm not sure if you'd agree with me, but I find a lot of conflicting feedback. I don't see a lot of men receiving it. And please disagree with me on this, but I felt like the journey was a bit harder for me. And I've spoken to so many women leaders, and they've been hearing similar things. But if I start early on, let me talk about the recent situation, the example that I gave. So the same person, after a couple of months, gave me the feedback subsequent to a meeting that that's where the conflicting feedback comes in. Is I actually approached and I asked more details around why would you think that? I want to understand more of where you're coming from. But what happened was they were looking at a specific incident, a specific situation, and not really what led to it. So that they failed to see it. I think reflecting when I started my corporate role in telecommunication, and I was pretty new and I was really learning the ropes of what corporate world is about. And being an introvert myself, when I got this feedback, I started adjusting myself to that. I started molding myself and trying to fit to the stereotype that they were representing. Just because I come from Sri Lanka and I'm part of a minority group as well. So I think there was another part, another complexity where I didn't quite feel like I fit in a specific location. I think all in all, what led to was for me to not be myself. And I felt at a point that I was really ashamed because I'm not being myself. I'm not being true to myself. So just because I don't speak your language, or just because I don't share the same hobbies as you do, or I didn't have the same upbringing as you do, it doesn't mean that my success is defined by me trying to fit that mold that you created for yourself, right? So I think that's how I saw it. So I realized it a little bit later on in my career that it's not always about you that you have to change. It's also about the other side and the perception that you have to change. So I stopped changing on those varying degrees of expectation. And I started creating values that were important to me, which was being authentic, being people centered. Those were things that were really important to me. And I started from that.
Yeah, so it seems like you went deep into yourself to understand who's Sabrina, what are my values, what makes me authentic, what makes me, so that you weren't ashamed of that. And it seems like you're still very good at listening to feedback, but then you're also really good at filtering and understanding what's relevant to you. Because I think people are well-intentioned when they give feedback, but it's not always helpful because they can't see your full perspective. They don't understand your background. They don't understand your values. So you ask questions, you try to understand, but ultimately you really focused internally to understand, who am I? What's important to me? So that you could feel proud of who you were and be authentic as you grow in your career. So you feel good about yourself and your career and your work all together.
I think authenticity is the heart of everything that we do. In the world of Gen AI, I think it's very important.
Yes, especially. Is that you finding your voice? Is that how you found your voice when there was a conflicting expectations?
So I think if I think about finding my voice, if I reflect on it, I wouldn't point it saying it happened in a specific time, because it was really a journey to me. And I'm sure it's a journey for everybody, right? And I could think about it as not finding my voice, but really for me to realize what I can do with it. That was important for me because that's when you realize your true purpose. If I look back, I talked about the journey of finding my voice and all of that, and I recall one incident where one of my ex-coaches, who was a really brilliant lady, very strong, very influential, well-spoken, and I couldn't find anything in common with her because we were two opposites. And even if we would talk anything outside of work, we would talk about the Canadian weather, like any Canadian, right? So I didn't really have anything common. But I remember this one incident where we were meeting a group of agency members, right? These were associates from an agency. We were doing a briefing. So I was supposed to present the technology and the work that we're doing. So at that time, I was not really liking presenting. I hated it. I did not like it at all. So this was a massive office and people wearing suits and majority men, and you're now presenting to them. I did horribly. Like it was such a bad job. I felt so bad at the end of it. And my coach, she could see visibly that I was upset. We caught up for lunch and we sat down, and then she started telling me a story about her experience where she had to present, and she had an anxiety episode where she had to stay awake till 5 a.m. because she was so nervous about the presentation. And I was really surprised. And at that moment, I realized that's my connection with you. That's the commonality we have. And her words resonate with me, which was do what you fear the most, repeat and repeat. So that was something that was, I know it seems so simple, but I really stuck with it. So from there on, I started doing things that made me uncomfortable. I started finding opportunities to present. I was putting myself up there and saying, okay, I want to present, even though I'm not probably going to do a great job, but I'll keep trying and keep trying. So trust me, it got better. So finding your voice is not just about presenting, and it's more complex than that. But when you start being able to articulate your ideas in a way others could listen, it is really powerful. So that's why I think one of the occasions I remember about how I broke the barriers of feeling uncomfortable and being able to speak.
I love that story. It's a lovely story because it has so much to it. Because you were able to connect through that story with your coach, her advice came through a lot stronger to you. It became way more relevant. And you realize in that moment that, yes, you had to embrace the discomfort of repeating the very thing that you hated and that you had failed at in a way until you got good at it. So and now here you are volunteering to speak on the podcast, right? So you see how that's changed completely. Speaking of finding commonality, I think the first time I had to do public speaking, and it was 5 minutes of speaking, I cried on stage. It's like pretty ugly. So I think we all have these terrible experiences at the beginning. It's, and like you said, it really is about the strength is doing what we don't want to do over and over again. I love that, how you did that, and it changed things. Do you like public speaking now in presentations?
Yeah, so funny enough, I do now. As long as I'm prepared.
Yes.
So that's important because when someone puts me on the spot and asks me a question, like that's the moment that I do not like. But I think I throughout the years, the more I started doing it, understand you're able to engage with the audience and you really get an energy out of it. I would say yes, I do, as long as I'm prepared.
What a transformation. And you also talked about before when we chatted that you had some traumas in childhood. And we know how these traumas really affect us at so many levels, and they affect us professionally as well, right? What was your experience like? What were your traumas and how did they affect you?
Yeah, I think I mentioned a while back that I come from Sri Lanka. So I was born there. I was born during a time there was a civil war. So there was a conflict between the Tamils and the Sri Lankans. So I was a Tamil. So during that time where I was born right in the middle of the war, I was born in a concentration camp. And the first 5 years of my life was not great, which means you would come to your backyard, you'd see a backyard full of empty shell casings, you'd see a massive hole on your wall, or you'd be cooking for your lunch and then you'd hear these noises coming, helicopters shooting down, and you just land inside a bunker and you wait until everything's gone. So somehow me and my mom, we managed to get out of the area. We moved to the city, but we left my father behind. And I still remember that train ride because it was pretty sad leaving my father behind. But we were safe, and my father joined us later on. But I think from there on, being part of a minority, and you always feel a little inadequate because I was treated differently. In school, I was bullied. I was called a terrorist. My father was arrested a couple of times just because his name was, and it was a tough period. It was actually a tough period for everybody. But as I progressed in my career, as I got into adulthood, I got into the corporate life, I kind of carried that trauma a little bit because throughout my childhood, I was ashamed of who I was. So I hid my name so I don't get bullied. So I'm not a Tamil. So when I got into the corporate world, I had that a little bit. All I wanted to do is just work and work. And I didn't want to interface with people. I wanted to avoid that. It took me a lot to get out of it. So I think like early on, I mentioned how much it's important to have a mentor or a coach or a person who can really make you realize that there is a lot more you can achieve by connecting with people. So yeah, so a lot of great people in my life that helped me, and me being willing to get that help was also important. So that's one experience I can recall. And I would add to it, it's not an easy journey. If you had trauma, it need not be the same because everybody have their journey, which is different, and it's equally hard. And just know that there's always someone you can reach out to and talk to. It could be a coworker, or it could be anyone that you go to an event that you meet, or through networking circles that can help take your career to the next level. It's all about speaking to 10 people and finding that one connection. I think that was really important.
Speaking to 10 people and finding that one connection. I never heard that. I like it because sometimes people have the expectation that if they talk to one person, they should connect. But sometimes it does take 10 people and maybe 9 people that it doesn't quite work out in that moment. But that 10th person might be the exact person you needed to get a breakthrough and be able to overcome or get the support you need to get to your next level authentically, like you did.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's tough because I do have a good friends from Sri Lanka, and they did take us to visit the wonderful country now, a few years ago, but the war was gone. But they also experienced the war and shared how any war is really tough. It's very tough to go through that. You're very conscious about how all of these things are affecting your ability to be your best self, be authentic. And you've been seeking out help and making changes. And that's very admirable, right? Having that self-awareness. And so you talked about introverted nature, which I am as well. Have you ever felt misunderstood, or has your introverted nature ever been misinterpreted in a negative way?
It has so many ways. So I think this has changed now because I don't want to generalize it, but I think we live in a world that's a bit better now, where the extrovert leadership is dominating the narrative, right? We've heard that a lot. And as introverts, we're misunderstood. We're misunderstood as not being confident or not having the competence. And we always try to deflect attention. I do that all the time because as introverts, you don't really like the attention that much. And you try to downplay your ability to do something, or you downplay what you have done or you delivered. And if you're in a room full of loud voices, you get lost. So your voice is not obviously heard. So I think it has been that for me. And like I mentioned, I was not really liking to present much. So this was during a time when I was in that phase. And I applied for an internal position at a private company, and this lady interviewed me. And we had a great interview, and she had a track record of my performance, and I was one of the high performing individuals. But she asked me, hey, what are some of the opportunities for you? And I was pretty open, pretty transparent, and I shared with her my fear that I don't really like presenting, but I want to work on it. So I think sometime later, a couple of weeks later, she reached out and said, hey, sorry, you're not selected. We chose someone else because we're looking for someone who has confidence in presenting. So I internalized it. It did impact me, but I really felt energized by that feedback. Now I was really wanting to master this art of presenting and communicating. Like I mentioned before, from that was one of the experiences that really led me to put myself in those situations where I get opportunities to present. Yeah, I think you come through experiences like this and you do feel a bit down or demotivated by a situation or a feedback, right? When just know that it's just one incident, one situation. So from there on, it's up to you to change that, right? So trust me, the more you do it, the easier it gets. So for me, it's still hard, but it's better than it did before.
The fact that you were essentially rejected for a position, and for the exact thing that you were rejected, for you to turn that around and that energized you, that speaks a whole lot about you. Because I think 99% of people would feel absolutely defeated and even dislike the idea of public speaking or presenting even more. Whereas you felt energized to say, hey, if that's what people are looking for, let's get on to it. Let's figure this thing out. Knowing that stepping on those stages to make presentations, the first time you did it, the second time, the third time, it was going to be stressful. It was going to cause anxiety. It might prevent you from sleeping at night. You might feel bad about your performance afterwards, yet you're still energized to try it out and go through all of that many times until you did feel comfortable. So I like that you say, hey, it's up to you to be in charge, because you take charge of your situation. And that's beautiful.
Thank you. And I think even for teenagers nowadays, and my son himself is an introvert, and he's also the only child as myself. So when you don't really have siblings to fight with and to grow up in that sort of environment, you become. So I think one thing that I tend to see is that we really sometimes quick to give up and move on to the next thing, but don't, right? Just don't. But if you feel like it's worth it, keep at it. For me, my voice was an important thing for me to work on it, because that's going to now help me grow my career. It was critical for me to really fight that demon. So the same goes to everybody. So I feel one defeat does not really mean that you are going to be defeated, period.
Yeah, no, for sure. And when it comes to your voice, and you said it's important for you to be heard, but that it's hard sometimes in a meeting with a lot of loud voices, it's hard to be heard. Or in different situations, it's hard to be heard as an introvert in general, when you're around a lot of extroverted people.
Mm-hmm.
So when was a time that you felt like you were truly heard and respected at work?
Yeah, so I think similarly, like when my voice was heard or when I found my voice, this was the same. It was the journey. I think it took a lot of smaller incidents for me to feel I'm heard. Because I've been in situations where you give an idea and then someone else says the same idea, and then everybody's, yeah, that's a great idea. That's the same thing. So that had happened so many times in my career, and that had led me to keep silent sometimes. Okay, if someone else says it eloquently, or male leader says it eloquently than I do, so maybe it could get accepted, so I'll keep quiet. But I think one of the examples is when I was in telecommunication, it was majority was men, and I was in technology. Working there, it was really hard. It was really hard to be heard. But what I realized is that what is it that I have that you don't have? And I tried to work on that, which was my knowledge of the product and ability to build credibility, that they know that I'm the subject matter expert in that domain. So this was an incident where I had to, with my male coworkers, I had to go and present to a room full of directors, board members, an idea or a technology which we sell. And at that moment, it was nerve-wracking, but I told myself, nobody in this room knows this as much as I do. And I'm the one who's going to talk, and they're going to ask the questions. That gave me the confidence thereon to present. And it went quite well. We were able to onboard them. So I think that was one of the defining moments that I felt. Even my co-workers came on from and appreciated that. But then subsequently, every single consultation that they wanted to have with regards to the product or any questions they had on the technology, it would be Sabrina. So it takes time, right? It takes time to build credibility. It takes time to build the knowledge. So it cannot be superficial. It has to be in depth. So that's when I started feeling that, okay, now I'm being heard. But as you grow from an individual contributor to a leader, then it's a bit different, right? So being heard is a little different, because now you don't have the intricate technical knowledge of the product, which is not really required, but now you need to really understand the business. You need to really understand the numbers. You really need to understand how to build a successful team, right? So those are things, as you grow into a leadership role, those are knowledge and key skills that you build that will bring in credibility.
Yeah, no, I like that. You found the confidence in acknowledging where you were better than others. What was your unique value proposition in the room, essentially.
Yeah.
And then fully embracing that and saying, hey, put your hands up and saying, I'll present, let me do this. And that got people to then start to recognize you as the expert, not just be the expert, but have people recognize you as the expert by seeking you out for consultation and advice. Beautiful.
Yeah. And just to add to that, if I didn't take that step of presenting and I gave someone else the opportunity, I wouldn't have had it, right? So I think it's important to take that initiative and put yourself there, and you'll surprise yourself, definitely.
Was it hard to get the opportunity to present since there were other people there? Or when you said, hey, I'll do it, were they accepting of it?
Yeah, I think they were accepting of it because there were other people who had the knowledge, but not as much as you did. So that was the advantage. So I think easily a male coworker could have spoken more eloquently than I did. I'm pretty sure, but not knowing the technical details, and when you probed more questions, I think you had that position to really provide qualitative responses. So I think that's where you had the advantage.
Got it. One of the things that you also shared is that you're a single mom. Is that right? So
Not now. I used to be a single mom.
Oh, you used to be a single mom.
Yeah.
That's right. Okay, you used to be a single mom. So when have you had to speak up or stand up for yourself as a single mom professionally? Have you needed to stand up for yourself in any situation?
Yeah, I had to. I was a pretty young mom with my sons at that time, being young, and I was also studying at the same time. I remember I was working so hard. I was focused on work, and I regret it sometimes right now because I wish I gave more time to my son. And I focused everything on my work, and then I come home, of course, I spend time with my son. And work was a priority for me because of I need to provide for my family. I was the only person. And also an incident where I got dengue fever. I was in the hospital in the ICU. And as soon as I got out of ICU, I was on my laptop working. And that's how dedicated I was in my work. And I don't advise anybody do that because that's not good behavior. But I got promoted, my career progressed. But people fail to acknowledge that I got promoted and I got recognized because of my hard work. I think it was really challenging when people challenged why you're getting promoted, right? So it was a tough time because I come from a culture where sometimes at that time it was acceptable to share certain feedback with female workers. So you had to deal with all of that as well. But I think going back to my previous point, you have to be persistent. Know what your core values are, know what you're really passionate about. And I was so passionate about work. So I just focused on that and I just completely ignored everything else that was happening in the background, the noise. So gradually, everybody realized that the credibility and the expertise I've built and the outcomes that I've delivered. And it was so visible that nobody was able to question anything. And not that I'm saying that we need to prove to anybody any of this. I don't think we need to prove anyone anything, but it's just speak to the challenges you had to face and what you had to do. So what I took out of it is just focus on what your end game is. Just focus on where your goal is and what's important to you, and just ignore everything else. It's just nice.
Yeah, because you were clear on what you needed. It was a tough time, but if I understood it well, because you were a single mom and people knew about it, they were thinking that your promotion wasn't deserved because there's no way that you would be contributing more than a guy who has got full support system at home and can only focus on work.
Yeah, that's true because I've gotten people directly saying to my face that, and I myself with a young child, you're already going through some stress and these really add on. Yeah, so I think in retrospective, if I look back now, that's 18 years ago, probably more than that. Yeah, 18 years ago, but a lot has progressed. So I'm really happy to see how much of great work as a society we've done to really transcend that. Even looking at Canada, a lot of single moms are so supported. I feel they are. It is really hard to be a single mom, but I feel we do have a great support system and great ethical and compliance practices to keep them safe. So I'm glad we're in this era right now. A lot of change is happening.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot better than it was.
Yep. Yep.
And here's one final question for you, which is you talked a lot about what's like to be an introverted person in a work environment. How has it been able to actually strengthen your leadership?
That's a great question. I think it has helped me a lot because as introverts, you observe, you listen a lot, right? And I think introverts, extroverts alike both are people-centered. I think both caring of people. But I think the advantage I had was I was able to observe, I was able to pay attention, I was able to listen, and I reserved my energy for that. So for me, if I take a step back and if you ask me what is one thing that's so important to you in your career, to me it's always people. Because without people, you cannot get anything done, you cannot deliver anything. And if you focus on people, and I think this is one of your episodes, you talked about people centered, or I forgot, I was listening to one of your episodes that we were talking about, which kind of resonated with me. So I think as an introvert, like I invested that energy on people and their growth and understanding how I support their growth, or how do I speak on behalf of them? How do I take my energy to advocate for them, provide them a spotlight, people can acknowledge them, and for them to build their brand. So I think those are the things that help me as an introvert, that I was able to focus on people and help the team to grow and support that.
That's brilliant. And that's a wonderful way to leverage these skills, right? Because often the extroverts want to be the center of attention and they want to focus on themselves, while the introverts are able to listen, like you said, and help others and really be there to support others and the team in their growth. And like you said, help them create a brand, a personal and professional brand as well. All in all, it seems like it's not that bad being an introvert as long as we leverage it to our advantage and choose to remain authentic and to focus on people and seek out help and mentorship whenever we feel stuck or we're in a difficult situation, so that we can move past it. And another thing that I think that is one of your superpowers, and I think it comes from part of your introverted nature, is you reflect a lot. It's clear that you're very reflective and you think about the different situations you go through, the challenges, and you're able to reflect your way to the next best step to solve it. And you're probably a good problem solver as well in general.
I try to be all of that. But I think just one thing I would like to leave as we close is there's a lot of expectations, right? I think in the world of changing technology and changing everything, right, the expectations keep changing as well. So it's so hard to keep up with all of these. But the one thing that you really need to cling on to is just be yourself. Just understand what are my values, what are the 3, 4 things that's really important to me to build my career, and just cling on to that and cling on to people who can support that. And I think mentorship, sponsorship are really great themes, and there's tons of content that we can go through to talk about that. And I couldn't talk enough about mentorship and sponsorship. So yeah, continue understanding what your values are and try to unlock the power of your voice.
Oh, so beautiful. Thank you so much, Sabrina, for sharing these stories and these insights and all of the authentic be yourself inspiration for us today.
Thank you, Ibna, for having me here. It's a pleasure.